If you're ill, you're treated. If you lose your job, you're still treated. If you are poor, old, unemployed, or simply unlucky, you're still treated. Hello and welcome to the Blorecast, your regular serving of aural entertainment with me, James Blore. In a recent episode, I compared life in the UK and in Slovakia, and one of the things that kept coming up while I was doing the research was healthcare. In the end, I decided that each system has its pros and cons, and that it was far too complicated to deal with properly in a short segment. But, scrolling through social media posts about the US healthcare system this morning, I was reminded that the two countries I've called home fundamentally have a lot in common. They share some very basic healthcare assumptions that are so familiar to Europeans that we rarely stop to think about them. If you live in Slovakia, the UK, or pretty much anywhere else in the European Union, you already live with universal healthcare. You may complain about waiting times, doctors' salaries, underfunding, crumbling buildings, or bureaucracy, and those complaints are often justified, but the basic principle is not really up for debate. If you're ill, you're treated. If you lose your job, you're still treated. If you are poor, old, unemployed, or simply unlucky, you're still treated. That baseline matters, and it's what makes the American healthcare debate sound so weird from a European perspective. The United States is the only major high-income Western democracy without universal healthcare coverage. Every comparable country, the UK, Germany, France, the Netherlands, the Nordic states, Canada, Australia, Japan, guarantees access to healthcare regardless of income or employment. The systems vary, but the principle does not. Healthcare is treated as a social right. In the US, by contrast, access to healthcare still depends on where you work, how much you earn, or whether you qualify for specific government programs. Losing a job can mean losing healthcare. Serious illness can mean long-term debt and bankruptcy. In the UK, the National Health Service, or NHS, is funded primarily through general taxation. Slovakia, meanwhile, operates a system of compulsory public health insurance. If you're employed, you contribute through your income. If you're a child, a student, retired, or unemployed, the state pays for you. The net result is the same. Healthcare is collectively funded and services are delivered largely free at the point of use. Of course, there are problems: staffing shortages, waiting lists, political underfunding, and aging infrastructure. But in both countries, access to medically necessary care is guaranteed. You don't receive a bill for a GP visit, hospital treatment, or emergency care. Out-of-pocket payments are limited and regulated. Those differences are key. While doing the research for this podcast, I thought it would be sensible to check my facts with an insider. So I contacted a former student of mine who's lived in the USA for about 15 years. He very kindly verified most of what I'd discovered about the US system, suggested a few tweaks, and shared some of his lived experience. His overall reaction to my initial draft was that it was fair and accurate, but that it underplayed just how bad the American healthcare situation is for an awful lot of people. Very briefly, healthcare in the United States is largely provided by private sector healthcare facilities, and around half is paid by a combination of private insurance and out-of-pocket payments from individuals. And who pays for the private insurance? Well, if you're lucky, your employer. If you're employed full-time in a larger company, they are legally required under the Affordable Care Act to offer health benefits that meet certain standards. Small employers are not obligated to offer health insurance at all. Overall, just over half of all firms offer health benefits. But because larger firms almost always do, the vast majority of workers are employed by a firm that offers coverage. The employers typically subsidize most of the premium costs, but employees usually pay some portion themselves. For certain groups, mainly older people, people with disabilities, and those on low incomes, there are also government programs like Medicare and Medicaid. But even including those, public funding accounts for only about 43% of overall healthcare spending, compared with roughly 80% in the UK and Slovakia. But as long as you're employed by a large company or you qualify for a state program, it's all good, right? Right? Well, maybe. Even if your employer does provide and subsidize your private insurance, it doesn't mean that care is free or even affordable at the point of use. In the US, most insurance plans have something called a deductible, a large amount you have to pay for yourself before your insurance starts covering more than the basic costs like preventative care. Think of it like a car insurance excess or spoluúčasť. But instead of paying it for each accident, you pay it once per year across all your medical bills. Only after you hit that annual threshold does the insurance really kick in. And this deductible is in addition to the monthly insurance premium employees pay after the employer subsidy. And even after you've paid the deductible and the premiums, you usually still pay co-pays or co-insurance, fixed charges per visit or a percentage of the total medical bill. So you can be well insured on paper and still face major costs every time you use the system. Let me give you a couple of real-life examples. When my daughter was very young, she was quite tall and somehow managed to flip herself over the railings of her cot and land headfirst on the floor. Naturally, she cried vigorously. My wife and I panicked and took a taxi straight to pohotovost, accident and emergency, or A&E in British English, ER in America. We waited a little bit, then she went for a scan or two. The doctors confirmed that she'd be fine, and we went home, mightily relieved, and kept our eyes open for any signs of concussion. Thankfully, there were none, and there was no bill of any kind either. Meanwhile, in America, going to ER is one of the most expensive things you can do, medically speaking. Even insured Americans often face a large annual deductible plus co-pays or co-insurance. That means an ER visit for a broken arm can easily cost $500 to $1,000 or more, even if you've been paying monthly premiums all year. So you really have to think carefully every time. Do I really need to go to ER? Or can this wait for a referral from my regular doctor? And even that will cost you. My ex-student had something weird going on with his arm. So he went to his doctor, who sent him for a scheduled follow-up ultrasound in hospital. He did his due diligence and verified that the hospital was on his health insurer's list and used their cost-checking tool, which projected $38. Fairly reasonable, he thought, and he went for it. He was there for around 2 hours, used one bedsheet, 3 towels, and a bit of gel. He later received a bill for $38 for the professional examination, and then a second bill for a $740 facility charge. In comparison, my wife and I had preventive abdominal ultrasounds last week. Each used a paper bedsheet, a bit of gel and a tissue, and were charged nothing. Even if you're insured up the kazoo, so to speak, working full-time and paying your monthly premiums, healthcare in America can still cost you a fortune. Deductibles, co-pays and co-insurance mean that a single ER visit or medical procedure can easily run into hundreds or even thousands of dollars. That makes people pause before going to the doctor, weighing cost against health in a way that would be unthinkable in Slovakia or the UK. And then there are the millions of Americans with no insurance at all. For them, the situation can be catastrophic. Any serious illness or accident can trigger medical bills that would make Europeans gasp. Recent US survey data indicates that about 8% of the population lacked health insurance in 2024. That's around 27 million people. Some simply can't afford private insurance and don't qualify for programs like Medicaid. Others are caught in coverage gaps. They've lost a job, had a change in income, or aged out of a parent's plan without securing new coverage. And still others are technically insured, only to discover that their plan doesn't cover the treatment that they need. When medical costs can reach thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars, it's easy to see how illness can become financial disaster. Across Europe, by contrast, The same injuries or tests are almost always free at the point of use, thanks to universal coverage. In Europe, you may grumble about waiting weeks to see a specialist. In the US, people often delay seeing a doctor at all because they're afraid of the cost, even if they have insurance. And those delays surely cost lives. Now, here is where the comparison with Europe becomes truly uncomfortable. Between public and private contributions, the United States spends far more on healthcare per person than any European country, roughly 1.5 to 2 times more than the UK, France, or Germany, for example. So you might think the US has better results. It doesn't. In fact, average outcomes are worse. Lower life expectancy, higher infant mortality, much higher levels of medical debt. Direct comparison shows that universal healthcare systems in Europe are cheaper, more effective across the population, more equitable, and more stable across an individual's lifetime. So why does the American system persist? I guess that it will come as no surprise that the answer is mainly money. In European systems, the state or regulated insurers negotiate prices collectively, limiting what pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, and intermediaries can charge. In the US, healthcare is fragmented across hundreds of insurers and providers and countless plans. Pricing structures are opaque, administrative complexity is huge, and profit is extracted at every stage. And the entities profiting, large insurers, hospital chains, pharmaceutical companies, are also amongst the most powerful political donors and lobbyists in the country. They bankroll campaigns, think tanks, policy institutes, and media narratives. Universal healthcare threatens their interests, so reform isn't just debated, it's demonized. Instead of remaining a discussion about evidence and outcomes, the American healthcare debate often shifts to ideology. Universal healthcare is frequently labelled socialism. From a European perspective, this is puzzling, but also revealing. Universal healthcare, like progressive taxation and public pensions, does reflect a principle of solidarity. People contribute according to their means and receive care according to their medical need. That ethical logic overlaps with ideas historically associated with socialism. But the systems that actually exist in Europe are not socialist economies. The UK, Germany, Slovakia, and the Nordic countries are all capitalist democracies. Markets, private property, profit, and private healthcare providers all exist. What differs is not the economic system, but the decision to treat healthcare as shared social infrastructure like roads and fire brigades, rather than as a consumer good. In the United States, however, the word socialism functions less as an economic description and more as a dog whistle warning label. It signals loss of freedom, government overreach, even authoritarianism. Once that label is applied, evidence tends to stop mattering, and the conversation shifts from outcomes to the politics of fear and identity. Comparisons with Europe are quickly reframed as cultural incompatibility. But this is America! We value individual freedom more! It couldn't work here! And therein lies a final irony that Europeans often notice. Americans are told that their system maximizes choice and freedom, but in practice, your employer determines your choice of insurer. Sure, you can buy your own plan, but unsubsidized it will be much more expensive. Then, your insurer decides which doctors you can see and which hospitals are in-network. Or they set price caps, giving more choice but increasing out-of-pocket expenses. Your plan determines your coverage and is often opaque, so it's difficult to know ahead of time what you will pay. And fear of the cost determines whether you seek care at all. In Europe, you may have fewer insurance brands to choose from, but far more freedom to change jobs, start a business, take parental leave, or get sick without financial fear. And from a European perspective, that looks a lot like freedom. What makes the United States exceptional isn't cost, quality, or outcomes, it's narrative. The evidence strongly suggests that universal healthcare systems are cheaper, more efficient, and more secure. Europeans live inside those systems every day. Americans pay more because profit extraction is structurally protected, political lobbying blocks reform, and identity-based framing discourages comparison. This isn't a failure of evidence. The evidence is everywhere. It's a triumph of storytelling, a story that protects profits, preserves political power, and persuades people to accept bankruptcy as the price of freedom. Those of us in Europe should take a moment to value what we already have. In the words of Cicero, gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the parent of all others. Universal healthcare doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes quietly through underfunding, fragmentation, and the slow normalization of lower expectations, while the guarantees remain on paper. The real risk for Europe is not that it suddenly becomes America, but that it forgets the value of what it already has, until repairing it becomes politically and financially impossible. It's easy to grumble about healthcare when it works poorly, but harder to imagine life without it. That's worth remembering and protecting. I'm James Blore. This has been the Blorecast. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye. Comparisons with Europe are quickly reframed as cultural incompatibility. But this is America! We value individual freedom more. It couldn't work here.